when she came to HBS to do her MBA. And she never really left HBS after that. So after a year as a dedicated research associate, she joined Executive Education in 1996 to help develop the school's first major custom program. In 1997, she set up the Executive Education R&D group, a pooled research group in support of faculty teaching in executive education and custom programs. In 1999, that support was extended to all HBS faculty. She has co-authored over 150 HBS case studies, articles and course materials, worked with faculty to help define quality case writing and promoted the case method. She speaks French, German, Spanish and a bit of Italian, and when not reading, writing or thinking about cases, she opens her home to world travelers, friends and pets in need of shelter. So very excited to have you here with us, and while that is a pretty formal introduction, we would love for you to share your journey with us, a couple of highs that you've had across your very illustrious career.
Sure. Well, first, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So it's funny, that you take me down the trip down memory lane. So one of the jokes that I like to have is that my office at the Harvard Business School is actually about 5 meters from my dorm room. So I've never gone very, very far. But in these 25 years, a lot of things have changed in the world of business, in the world of higher ed. So it's been great to be on this journey. My profession is a little bit strange. So I write case studies, which is the way that a lot of business schools around the world teach business. And the thought is that by putting people in the shoes of case protagonists that have to face a decision, that you will learn how you behave in these situations, and that's a better way to teach, and that you also learn from each other. So through this journey, I've also learned a lot of random facts about very random industries. So I'm very good at cocktail parties.
So you're a very curious person, and along the way, I'm sure you've spoken to a lot of interesting people. So are there any instances from your career that stand out, instances that you were really delighted by, or people that you met that really inspired you? Any sort of points, any milestones in your career that were highs for you, either in terms of the relationships you built, the people you met, or any kind of success that you had along the way?
So 2 people come to mind immediately. One is a person that I interviewed at INSEAD, which is a partner business school of Harvard Business School, and as a writer, he said, you bear a great deal of responsibility because in many ways you are the scribe, and the way that you write about business, the way that you present protagonists is going to be the way that thousands of people, tens of thousands of people around the world read. So for example, when I'm writing about women in the workforce or women in protagonists, I really pay attention about using a neutral language, not being biased. So he had a great deal of impact because I think as writers you don't think that you have that much of a direct impact on how people see the world. And then the second is somebody that I met very recently, a woman who's been actually working for 40 years at the Los Angeles airport, and she's in charge of a lot of the logistics on the air side. And so we went with her on her little car, and she drove me all over the airport, and you could really feel her passion for this highly complex work of logistics.
Wow, very interesting. So Carin, the book that you've written on compassionate management of mental health in the modern workplace, it's a very, very interesting topic. And we'd love to hear what drove you to actually write this book. What inspired you to choose this topic in particular? And what sort of got you into this whole zone? Because I think you've done a lot of really good research, and I think having been through the book, there's a lot in there that must have taken a lot of hours to think about and put together. So what pushed you in this direction? What inspired you about this topic?
So I think a combination of professional and personal interests. So I'll start with the personal. So a very good friend of mine died by suicide, and shortly after being laid off. And at the funeral, you start to talk to other people, and they say, well, he was under a great deal of stress in the workplace. It was a very hostile environment, and other people started to share that story. And so, I sort of put it away in my mind. This was 2012. And then at the same time, I was doing a lot of cases on companies that were working extremely hard to cut costs, by 1 or 2%. And then putting, as on the side that about a third of us have, at some point in time will have a mental health disorder, which may lead us to be less productive at work, with companies that are working so hard and hiring consultants to lay off people. I said, well, there might be both a moral imperative in terms of what a manager can do to make life better for others, but also very much of a productivity and a financial incentives. So I was very lucky that one of my co-authors from a long time ago, Professor John Quelch, had a dual appointment at the School of Public Health and at the business school. And so jointly we started with a note, and then that evolved into a bigger book.
Okay, wow. So I think that's, in today's day and age where there's so much automation, people often think that they can just ignore HR or human-related issues and that machines will get the work done. Especially, I think, in a country like India where mental health is not something that's really spoken about. It's a pretty big stigma. People don't really want to open up about it, and they don't really want to share, what their issues are. So, what would be your advice for organizations, for managers, CEOs who are managing talent? How could they maximize their people's potential? Of course, there are ways to be efficient by just replacing them or firing them. But if they had to actually work with the existing team that they had and make the most of them, what would be your advice, keeping in mind the context of the book you've written and the research that you've done?
So I think it's a very broad question. So we wrote the book from the point of view of the manager, because if you look at in the workplace, there's a lot written on self-help and a lot written on company-wide what you can do. But I think that the manager has a big impact. So when you look at the research in terms of productivity and happiness at work, clearly the boss is the biggest influence. So 70% of us think we're great bosses, and I think that 80% of our employees say that we're the biggest source of stress in their lives. So from then, I think anybody who touches people, and we wrote for managers, but also anybody who runs a coaching department or a preacher, so people who touch others. We organized a framework for the book around, it starts with the person. So I think the first thing that you can do as an individual is just take maybe a hard look, and just, you scan yourself for mental illness, you go to the doctor to get physicals, maybe every 6 months do a mental physical of yourself. Before you get to the workplace, think of, how you are doing. Try to leave these things outside, realize, so there's a bunch of, other ideas, but how, you go into the workplace, how you might need to manage people very differently. So for the most part, a lot of organizations reward cookie cutter approaches. Everybody's got to always look okay at work, pretend that everything is fine. If you can build a workplace where people are willing to be a little bit more vulnerable to you and open up to you, then it gives you a chance as a manager to accommodate them, and then you will find a little bit more loyalty, I think, on their behalf. You asked about automation first. So, the other movement related to automation is that we're becoming more and more of a cognitive workplace. So it's more about services. As long as you were on the railroads, nobody really could tell whether you had to do your job. If not, you would be mistreated. In the modern workplace, you can idle a lot and hide. But yet, if your entire organization is built on the brains, of your people, that's the only asset you've got. So I think we have to pay a little bit more attention to it.
Okay, so that actually brings me to the concept of neurodiversity, and I think that's something that you've touched upon. So can you explain that? I mean, how do we recognize neurodiversity? How do we appreciate it? And how do we work with the diversity that we have? Not just in terms of race or, in terms of nationality, but also in terms of people's mental health.
So one thing that we really wanted to avoid with the book was for people to use it as a tool to, either identify people who might be having problems or be different, and then find, a way out. So we really wanted to send a message of inclusion. So we set off to interview CEOs who, there's one CEO in the book who has severe ADHD, and he built an entire organization around that, and he's actually quite good at what he does. Everybody knows the pathology, everybody can, accommodate to him. A lot of Silicon Valley, people who code are very different from surgeons, who are very different from poets. And yet again, we have organizations that are fairly, everybody has to sort of behave a certain way. When you think that people are neurodiverse, you also have to think about how you house them, for example. So open offices like this one are fantastic for collaboration. But if you're a very strong introvert, or if you suffer from ADHD, then they can be very stressful, because as soon as somebody moves, you will be distracted. So one of the things in the book is, think about where your team sits, with whom they partner, in order to leverage these differences and not exacerbate the stresses.
Okay. So let me open it up now for questions to our live audience as well as our in-person audience.
Yes.
So would anyone like to ask a question?
Sure. So, hello, my name is Rishika and I work as a student engagement associate here. It was lovely listening to you. And my question is, what is something that you would recommend to be job satisfied?
To be satisfied at work?
Yes.
So work is extremely important to our well-being. So when you really look at the drivers of satisfaction in life, I think, so you're in a social entrepreneurship organization, so you know you have a lot of passion and you're very lucky. I think for many people it's a struggle about finding purpose in the workplace, and I think for your generation, for the most part, you're quite young. I think this really matters. So making sure that your values are aligned with the values of the organization, and not going in thinking it's going to be okay for 2 years, I'll just suffer, I'll learn some skills. Because I think in those 2 years, if you're extremely unhappy or you fail, then you will have significant consequences until the end. I think also having a good sense, if you can, of at the recruitment process of what is the culture of the organization. So for example, I have a very difficult time, we were just talking about this before, about people who complain all the time. Right. So I think if I ever were to change jobs, I would really ask, try to get a meal, so what is this like, what do people complain about? Ask your future boss sort of how they manage, just to make sure that there's a fit. Right. I think it's very, very important, on the human side, not just on the professional side.
That's a great point. Anyone else?
I would like to go next actually. I have a question for you. So now in India and I'm sure in many other countries as well, there are many parents who put pressure on their kids to select a certain subject, like you say science, you say commerce, or they don't want the child to select something like arts or something which is not money making sort of. And that is some pressure that many kids also have on themselves. They are like in 8th standard and 9th standard and they're just school going and undergrads for that matter. What advice would you like to give the parents to handle this, or the kids if possible?
So I think it's, in general, parents really want their children to excel, and I think the pressure on parenting has really increased, and the pressure on the performance on kids has really increased. And sadly, at least in the US, we're starting to see a lot of kids who are coming to university who have to be quite heavily medicated because they have been under so much stress that they haven't learned to suit. So my advice would be not to push your children too much, but I think that's advice that is probably not right, because most parents will want to do their best, but maybe spending a little bit of time to equip your children with some of the same exercises. You've spoken in your columns about the importance of work-life balance, and that applies to children also we talked about taking 15-minute naps occasionally. So just encouraging them to be open when they struggle, that it's okay, not to keep it hidden, and encourage them to take care of their own mental health early on, maybe would be an advice. But it's not a population that I know very well. So.
Advising parents is always a tricky one.
Yes, and they will never do nobody does what they claim. But
okay, any other questions?
Yeah. So ma'am, the modern workplace is a very competitive one.
Yes.
And in this situation, I think like revealing your vulnerabilities would have a negative impact on your job prospects, right? So how can one in the workplace break free from the stigma associated with like stress and actually coming out and being transparent about your mental health? And how can organizations like accommodate such kind of behavior, or how can this balance be like created within an organization?
So one of the great sources of hope, or happiness may not be the right word, but encouragement of the book was that I think you guys are going to change the world in this space, because I think my generation, there's still a lot of, you have to pretend that everything is okay, people do not share. But my daughter is, when I see her with her friends, my daughter is 20 years old and in college, and they're quite open about, some of the struggles that they faced. They're exchanging tools. People have, Finsta, which is a dark Instagram where people will actually share some issues and get their peers to help them. So it's important to know you're not alone, usually. And then, as a manager or as a peer, you can also help by yourself showing some vulnerability. So I know it's very difficult in the workplace, and it's particularly difficult for young women, because when men do it, then it tends to be like, oh, he's being so brave. But if a young female does it, then it's like, well, see, she's incapable of managing. So I think we have a long, long way to go. But it's by beginning of having conversations like we're having today that I think we can make a difference. And you guys will demand that the world be different. I think that the workplace will be different. it never dawned on me as a young person to think of work-life balance. And yet my research associates demand it. And I think that's fantastic.
So we have a question from our Instagram live from Shiva Venkata. What are your views on human-centered artificial intelligence at workplace?
So could you just define the question? So is it about using AI to hire people? Is it to use AI in performance management or team deployment?
I think just generally, he's not given any specific details, but maybe anything if you can just share, your thoughts on any of these topics.
Using technology.
Using technology.
Yeah. So you're seeing the emergence of technology in apps. So in the US, for example, a lot of people use apps that may be like therapists on demand, Talkspace. People are claiming that they can tell from your smartphone if you're depressed. From the speed at which you type on a keyboard, it could be a suggestion that you're having at the beginning of a bipolar episode. So I think we're seeing a lot of use of technology as very early warnings, much as we're using sensors to figure out when people are starting not to walk properly or pre-stroke. So I think whatever you can do to help yourself with technology, but at the end of the day, you also all have to disconnect. And one of the things that we found out in writing the book is everybody complains a great deal about bringing work at home, but all of us are increasingly bringing home to work. And so it used to be you could leave the stressors of the home at home, but now everybody can reach you all the time. And so if there's a leak at your house, you'll know it immediately. If your kid is unhappy, you'll know it immediately. If the bus didn't arrive, you'll know it immediately. So I would say the technology can help us and also hurt us, but I'm not quite sure what human-centric artificial intelligence means in that respect. But
I think we need to throw that question back at Venkata. Shiva, we'll have a separate conversation on
yes,
with
that
you.
would be great. Yeah, that would be very interesting. Thank you for asking.
So we have a quick rapid fire.
Yes. And I think you had a question.
Yeah,
yes.
okay. So nowadays everyone is suffering from one or the other issues in their life. So what would be your advice so that they can stay stress-free and they can be more productive at work?
So a little bit of stress is good. We're wired for stress. It helps us to perform. I think stress becomes toxic in several instances. So often it's when you have an inability to sort of define your work task. So a toxic supervisor is problematic. But also if you have the ability to have a little bit more agency about how you do your work, where you might do your work, what is the nature of the tasks. Doing too much is not good, doing too little is not good. So there's also, we talk a lot about burning out, but boring out is really very, very terrible for people. And a lot of people are bored at work. So I think finding the right balance for you, and because some people do extremely well in high stress environments. And I think just being honest to yourself, which is, and maybe it's a question that relates also to the parents, which is there are many, many ways to succeed in life. And I think, again, maybe our generation had a much more narrow sense about what that meant. But I think there are very many different models of success in contributing to society. And it's not necessarily being, a manic rat in the rat race if it's not for you.
That's a nice one. Boring out versus burning out.
Yes. Or sensing out, which is related to, finding purpose at work.
I'm going to remember that. So we have a quick rapid fire. We're not letting you escape without the rapid fire. So what does Carin do to unwind?
So often, they say that people, like doctors are the least good at, least healthy people. So I don't unwind that much, but I do like to dance.
Okay, nice.
Yes.
So maybe we'll
well,
have
it's not nice when I dance,
maybe
but
we'll
I
have
like to
a
dance.
demo later. If not at HBS, and I know it's a hard question to answer because you've been there for almost 30 years.
Yes.
Where would you be?
So I would be in a startup if I weren't risk averse, probably.
Okay, a startup. Your favorite healthy addiction?
Dancing, probably.
Okay.
Or to swimming.
Okay, swimming. Something that you love about India?
The people.
Okay, something that you don't love about India?
I haven't come across anything yet.
Okay, nice. That's a safe.
I've been very spoiled. Yes.
Your first impression when you walked into the Talerang office?
Happy.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Amazing. So it was lovely to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having
much.
me.
And I think all of you should grab a copy of this book. It is one of the most relevant topics today. I think we cannot hide from the reality of the new age workspace, and I think the more